Thanks very much. So you can now see why we're so fortunate to have Yoram back in New York for this presentation today, and also why he's such a celebrity in Israel. One of the reasons is because he's so lucid. It's a kind of generosity of style of presenting to make sure that we really understand what it is that he wants us to understand. So thank you very much for that, Yoram. I'm going to say very little in getting the discussion going. But basically just this, that isn't it wonderful to have somebody with the sort of background that I told you about at the outset, that Yoram started out here in New York working as a bench neuroscientist in Eric Bell's lab, but simultaneously trained in psychiatry and then in psychoanalysis. To have somebody who's got that sweep of expertise from the basic neuroscience to the subtle complexities of lived lives that we study in psychoanalysis is a really enormous, precious asset. It's sad that there's so few people who have that breadth of knowledge, but it really is, as I hope you could see from this presentation, something which we should all aspire to one way or another. We can't all go back to school and train in the way that he did, but I hope that it sort of sets the model for the kinds of training curricula that we'll have in the future for psychiatrists and psychoanalysts and clinicians working in the mental sciences in general. Things are so obvious, which otherwise are so opaque, if you have the ability to assimilate all the different sources of information that we have today about the life of the mind as exemplified today in relation to anxiety. It's also so heartwarming for somebody like me to sit there and listen to this matter-of-fact sort of trundle through the history of our field. It starts with Freud, and then there was this Melanie Klein person, and then there's John Bowlby, and after that there's attachment theory, and then you get the art concept, and now we know this about the neural mechanisms of anxiety, and this is where that was wrong, and this is where that seemed to have been on the right track, and these are the implications for the future. And the implications for the future are enormous. It really is, just to say sort of the obvious, our whole nosology in psychiatry needs to be rethought in the light of this information. Panic disorder, does it belong with the anxiety disorders, or does it belong with the mood disorders? It really seems, in terms of the information that's now available to us, to belong more with mood disorders. It has to do with the same sort of things as depression and the like have to do with. Some other research which Yoram knows about is pointing to the same thing applying perhaps even to OCD, that the quality of the anxiety in OCD seems to be more of the depressive type, the panic type, the separation, distress type of anxiety. So if we're going to make progress in psychiatry today, we really need to rejig our entire taxonomy of mental disorders on the basis of knowledge of this kind, which, as I said, is heartwarming for somebody like me to see this crumble through the history and to see where psychoanalysis fitted into it. It was a serious attempt from Freud and Klein and Bowlby in relation to the anxieties to closely study the phenomenology of the feeling states of the human mind, trying to classify them, describe them, taxonomize them, see, is this the same thing as that? And just gradually feeling our way through it, trying to build up a picture of the basic sort of component parts out of which our mental instrument is built. Taken so much further today with the radical new tools available to us in the neurosciences to be able to get right down to the minutiae of the underlying mechanisms, and also to be able to test our hypotheses experimentally in ways that with the clinical method available to those early pioneers, in ways that wasn't then possible. Now we can sift out competing hypotheses, make predictions, test them experimentally. I think the thing that's most sadly lacking is the feeding of that back into psychoanalysis, and we're trying to feed it back into psychoanalysis, and that's what this whole center is about, and the society that we started, 11 years ago, is all about. trying to get psychoanalysis to retake its place among the family of mental sciences and make its own special contribution, which is still very much, there to be made. It's one thing to celebrate the advances that have been made in regard to the technologies that I've referred to and that Yoram described or alluded to in his presentation. Those are enormous advances. They're enormous opportunities that were closed to us in the past. But that doesn't mean that the close study, the careful study of the phenomenology of lived human experience isn't still a very powerful tool. And if we can just look again at the sorts of data available to us in psychoanalysis, in the light of what neuroscience is teaching us, I think that we can make a very special contribution there too. And Yoram mentioned the psychoanalytical studies we're doing in Cape Town at the moment, where we're studying psychoanalytically patients like Mrs. S. of Damasia. And I don't want to, what's the word, let the cat out the bag. But I can tell you that we're learning some really interesting things. We're learning some things about what it's like to have no amygdala that only a psychoanalyst could learn. Taking the time, using our techniques and our methods, which have enormous weaknesses but also special strengths, to feed back to the neuroscience of something about fear and anxiety. The same could be done in all sorts of other ways, and it's just really sad that we don't, as a discipline generally, don't do it. I mean, thankfully, we do, and some of us in this room do, but I just wish that we could do it more generally, and we could be psychoanalysts like this chap, who just in this very natural, ordinary way sees, well, no, of course, all of that happened in the early days in psychoanalysis, and then all this other stuff happened in Bowlby attachment, and this other stuff recently in affective neuroscience, and let's see what we as psychoanalysts can do with it. Such simple studies as just systematic looking at analytical material in relation to the different psychopharmacologies that you refer to. And why don't we do that? There's no such thing as psychoanalytical studies of what happens when you take SSRIs versus benzos versus this versus that. I mean, geez, why haven't we done it? It's really quite astonishing, But luckily we're on the road and we're busy doing it. So that's what I wanted to say. That's opening the discussion. And since we have the honor of the Jaap Pankse's presence, I think I'll ask him to make a comment first, and then I'll start the open discussion. I'm bringing you the mic. But maybe you want to say something in response to that?
Thank you, Yoram. Duplicate what Mark said. There's obviously devils in the detail here, plenty, as you know. Let me just focus on one of the devils, that wonderful Eisenberg-Lieberman study that appeared in Science First in 2003. Oh, okay. Let me repeat that. Just want to say all the positive things that Mark said, but will not repeat them, but feel them deeply. And I wanted to just emphasize that in science, the devil's always in the details. And I'm not telling Yoram anything, but one of the highlights of the data that supports kind of a panic, separation, distress, Bowlby to whatever Pankse type of view, which is totally coherent, by the way. Not that I knew about Bowlby when I started my work. I just recognized.
It's okay now. Bowlby didn't know about you either.
No. As a matter of fact, Bowlby's great books of 1980. We were well on our way. We started this work in 1974. So there was no intellectual connection at all between the two. And when things converged this way dramatically, of course, Bowlby had already written stuff in the 50s, but it hadn't reached the horizon of the kind of intellectual prominence it deserved. And, aspect of neuroscience will take another, whatever, certainly several of my lifetimes, which I won't be around before neuroscience recognizes the issues they have to deal with. And neuropsychoanalysis is providing, I think, the guidance for neuroscience to really become a whole science, as opposed to simply, synaptic chemistries and electrodynamics, the tools that now allow us to move forward, especially the neurochemistry. And then all of a sudden cognitive science became cognitive neuroscience, and the brain imaging gives us wonderful information, but it doesn't necessarily automatically give us wonderful ways to interpret that information. And that's the dilemma. It's not straightforward at all. For instance, a brain imager can't even tell us whether their activational area is a center for excitatory activity versus inhibitory activity, because inhibitory neurons also convey their message to GABA release via action potentials. So if you generate a theory on these spots and you don't know whether it's excitation or inhibition, usually because you color book it red, people say, oh, that's excitation. No, functionally it could be inhibition. And your theory flip-flops 180 degrees and no one talks about it. What the hell is going on? Who are you trying to fool? I think you're fooling yourself because you haven't thought through the issues. So, but, that's preaching to the converted perhaps. But we take the wonderful study of Eisenberg and Lieberman, 2003 in Science, and, they very nicely did interpret it that, this is consistent with kind of Panksif's view of psychological pain being a foundation of attachment, separation, distress phenomena. And I didn't know that Freud said. Freud said essentially the same thing. To me, it's a pleasure to hear that there's intellectual continuity there. But then I look at the images and I say, does this area correspond to what we know about separation distress? And the answer was no in 2003. I said, what the hell is happening here? It's not in the right place in the anterior cingulate. It's in the dorsal cognitive cingulate, much more than in the really anterior cingulate where you have the separation system. So she's dealing with something else. And I heard Yoram clearly say, it does other things like conflict resolution. Ah, yes. When you are being rejected, you're in conflict, and you're going through all kinds of thoughts. I would rather interpret that data as conflict resolution, and then the anatomy is consistent. But then on top of that, you say, where else does this area light up? And the answer is sexual arousal. Think about Penfield's homunculus with, the body draped over the kind of somatosensory cortex with a butt above and the legs dropping down into the midline and the genital region being right there. Okay? So you've got the somatosensory projection area for the genital regions right there. Now there's some interesting psychoanalytic interpretations to be made. They're trying to castrate me, perhaps. Anyway, there's lots of clever ideas to be generated, but the one thing that strikes me, and sexual arousal, sometimes orgasm, will light up that specific region, and then I start to ponder and just free associate and say, what's that orgasm about anyway? The sexual lust, arousal, eroticism, it's a mixture of desire, seeking, but there's always a tension and conflict there. So sexuality is the most conflictual thing we have. And here we have the conflict area, and it's the interpersonal relationship. And, forward in the separation system, we do have the higher representations of the feeling of pain. When you really knock out the forward anterior cingulate, you still say, oh, I feel the cognitive pain, but the affective pain is gone. So, what is it about the orgasm? What is it about sexuality? Is it connected to the pain system? And yes, it is connected to the pain system. That's why there are these sadomasochistic tendencies. The orgasm and sexual pleasure are intimately related to pain. I don't know, did Freud develop that idea? Did he? Yeah? I'm developing right here on the spot, I've got my electrical pants down, just saying the way it's coming into my mind right now. People when they have orgasm, I think if they look at it very closely, and some neuropsychoanalysts ought to describe this subjectively, there is a special, lovely, exquisite pain. Okay? In some way, we love pain. We have a love affair with pain. Why would I say something as stupid as that? Because you just have to go to Carnegie Hall, you have to go any place where wonderful music is played, and if that wonderful music does not capture the poignancy of life, and the pain of life, the pain of existence, the attachment, the love, and then the loss, which is automatically there, we do not appreciate as great art. But if you have the rhythms of love, and then the rhythms of loss and pain, then we admire it as deep, great art. So, in some sense, these higher affective issues are connected to these primitive affective processes in some way. And, really, with all the hubris in neuroscience, and believe me, being a neuroscientist, I know how full of hubris my colleagues are. They are so full of hubris that they can no longer listen, all they can do is talk. It's amazing. It's a very unsatisfactory experience. But then again, that's what I'm doing right now. So I'm a neuroscientist, but hopefully thinking about the other things. Thanks a lot, Yoram. If you have any comments on that paradox of Eisenberg, it looks like orgasmic, a delightful thing.
Just to say, I'm blanking out of the name. I try to remember the name. I'll look it up later. There's a Canadian group that I think the principal investigator is a nurse who did some studies on female orgasm and pain. And they're finding, I think they did fMRI studies of female orgasm. And their finding was that there was inextricable link between pain and orgasm, at least in women. I'll look it up.
Just commenting, Georgiadis in Holstedter's lab in Amsterdam, they've done the best imaging of orgasms, and they originally started with male orgasm, which seems simpler to study, but then they moved to the female orgasm, and having a consenting partner aid a necessary stimulus, so there's some reality to it. And their last paper, I think 2009, basically says the male and female orgasm are identical in the kind of images you get. So we share that, but the appetitive, the eagerness, the erotic phase is very different in males and females. So.
Just to say the obvious, the fact that during orgasm in a scanner, conflict and pain varies. I'm more perceptive one, but it's not, the genitals are a little sort of north of that area, but the feet, don't forget the feet.
Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. It illustrates something I heard at a graduation speech Zucker Hillside this week. Stephen Roos gave a talk that said something about how psychoanalysis is wonderful at generating hypotheses, but now we're generating hypotheses with neuroscientists, not just for ourselves. I think this is terrific. I'd also like to say something about Jacques' response, because I think this is an example of the wonders of neuropsychoanalysis. If somebody had just walked into this meeting and never met him, they would have thought, what an amazing psychoanalyst. Your knowledge of neuroscience, how it has led to such sophistication in your understanding of psychoanalysis, to the extent that you say things and then you turn to Mark and say, is that something Freud said? So I think this is wonderful. But you've also muddied the waters a bit, quite a bit, and I'm going to do a little of that too. In a little different way. I'm convinced there are these two systems, for sure. I'm pretty convinced that clinically there are final common pathways. There are two systems of, we quote, anxiety, and we should think about changes in psychiatric nosology. I'm not sure if the psychoanalysts, how much it helps us to understand this as two systems of anxiety. Because one of the contributions of, I think, affective neuroscience and psychoanalysis is that loss of the object is an existential threat. That both of these systems involve existential threat, and for human beings, this is exquisitely so. So that once the mind is being developed from these brain systems, there can't remain any separation. And we run into problems, and I think an example you gave was about acrophobia, fear of heights, which you had as the existential threat and the fear system, and yet seeing a patient who has acrophobia is struggling with the often wish to jump, okay, which is not something to do, I think, with his biologically based fear system. And that gets to another issue about the fact that we understand that the existential threats of childhood are existential because of the helpless dependency of children. But when we talk, I think rightly so, about anxiety, we're talking about something that has been internalized regarding those interactions. And the anxiety is something that arises from within. And just to have a comment on a paper that I read recently, seems to engage some of these issues at a pretty early age as to the development of the mind, brain, and the attachment systems. There's this research, which is, I don't think it's all translated from Russian, using a paradigm of smiling and unsmiling faces presented to infants before and after they start to develop regular favoritism. And before that happens, when they're relatively immature, they don't show favoritism, for instance, in the absence stage of the peekaboo game. And around that time, when they're shown a smiling face, they engage the smiling face, and there's a particular marker, I think, is a pulmonary arrhythmia, which has something to do with vagal nerve and parasympathetic systems that regularly is activated at the time of this attention and excitement about seeing the smiling face. As the brain develops and we get to the point where the stable rhythm starts to appear in those situations, you show, and when you show the immature infant the unsmiling face, they just turn away. Okay, they don't pay attention, they just turn away, and they don't have this arrhythmia. Then when they become more mature, you show them the smiling face, they have the usual reaction. You show them the unsmiling face, and after a brief period of inattention, they regain the attention of the object, they look at the object, and they develop this arrhythmia, which suggests maybe a reactivation of this attachment system, a hallucination of the smiling face. I think all kinds of hypotheses, but this seems to be an early example of all of these systems being activated in another, well-documented, really strange situation paradigm.
Thank you. I have 3 comments to that. One is a smaller one that actually has to do with Jacques. I think the reason why Jacques is he can feel comfortable to himself and to us in this audience. And I actually think one reason why his neurobiological career led them in the direction that it did is because, unlike most neuroscientists, Jaak takes subjective experience seriously. And I think the main pitfall, I mean, really, neurobiology, the last 100 years, is really a beautiful edifice. It made many important discoveries. I think our lives are almost unimaginable without what it found. But it did so, at least for most of the 20th century, at the price of ignoring not just the value, but even the existence of subjective experience, because subjective experience rests outside our ability to measure it completely. We know it as a res privata. We know it as something that's returned to us, but we don't have any tools to measure it. And because of that, science ignored it. And and that's okay when you study subatomic particles, but it's not okay when you study human emotions. And I think one of the reasons why neurosciences and psychoanalysis were not talking to each other for most of the 20th century has something to do not just with our xenophobia, which we're very guilty of, but because in neuroscience there are very few people who are genuinely interested in the subjective qualities of experience. And I have to say, I'm curious to see what Jaak would say, have to say about this. But I think that one of the reasons that neuroscience now is interested in that is, ironically, because of technological advances. It's because now it has become possible to see the in vivo neural correlates of emotions, complicated emotions in living, interacting humans. And we saw some examples of that here. And I think that may be one of the reasons. But I think that what makes Jaak a unique neuroscientist is that he takes subjective experiences seriously, which is true to us psychologists. That's one thing. The second comment has to do with the question of the systems functioning separately or together. You're absolutely right. I think the point is well taken. There's every reason to think that they function together. We know from animal studies that they can activate and inhibit each other. I think panic disorder, if we take it, I think is a very complex issue I would be very hesitant to classify it as one or the other. I think that which we call panic is a very complicated issue having to do with both systems. I think we have some neurobiological evidence that we involve in both systems in it. And I think the same holds true for many other things. But I do believe that it is important to us that the fact whether there's one or two such systems is not just hair splitting on our part as psychoanalysts. Because I think that even when we are not conscious of it at the moment, whenever we listen to our patients, we have in the background, as a background, we have a metapsychology. We have our ideas about how the mind is constructed and how the causal events in the mind takes place when we listen to our patients. And I think that if we look at certain kinds of anxieties, and I will grant you that it's true that the fear of the loss of the love of the object is the quintessential existential threat in the lives of a normal human being in a situation where his life is not in danger. So the existential threat for most of us in everyday life is losing the love of the people who are most important to us. That is an existential anxiety. The way that it feels and its transformations, and transmutations, and projections, in my mind, would be influenced by the fact that it is a special kind of anxiety which is painful. That it's a different kind of anxiety than the one that we feel when we're about to jump or fall or be run over by a truck or be bitten by a snake, all of which are terribly unpleasant. We know they're unpleasant. They project to the pericortical grade, to the part of the dorsal part, the part that generates the feelings of unpleasure, to go back to the Freudian pleasure principle. We know that that's where they go, but it feels different. And I think that it leads to different explanations. If you look at the kinds of things that people do when they want to avoid activating their fear system, as opposed to the kinds of things that people do when they want to avoid activating the panic system, it would lead to very different life trajectories. So I think because of all these reasons, that differentiation can and should make a difference to us as psychologists.
If I may, I'll come relatively fast. All three of you, all four of you. In the midst of my short memory, but I'll come to it. I was going to say something very briefly because it so well illustrates this point that Yoram was just busy making about how it affects the mindset of the analytic clinician. I had an experience really very, very recently, not with a patient, but with a friend of mine, which comes forcibly to mind as I listen to this. He's an elderly businessman in South Africa, where I live. And he had recently a setback in his business. Nothing huge, it's a very huge business and it's very solid. But he had this little setback which caused him concern. And he started to experience anxiety attacks. And he just told me about this, as I said, very recently. As I listened to his description of the anxiety attacks, it was clear that what he was describing was panic. I mean, you can see how in a setback in business it could be either fear anxiety or panic anxiety. But it was clear that what he was describing were panic attacks, and the phenomenology of it was panic attacks. And so it was also clear to his psychiatrist, I imagine, because he had gone to a psychopharmacologist who had treated him with an antidepressant. And he was waiting for this to kick in, which is the shortcomings of these antidepressants. And so I just, because his friend told him about these two types of anxiety, probably bearing in mind I was on my way to America to listen to this talk, and said to him, this sounds like a panic type of anxiety, and I told him about Jacques' work and how it all relates to attachment and so on. And he was very interested, very intelligent chap. And then, a little while after that, we spoke again, and he said, it's very interesting, while I'm waiting for this drug to kick in the light of what you said, I've noticed this thing, that when the panic comes, what I think of is my children. I think how much they need me, how much I love them, and how nothing can ever change that when the panic goes away. So he's got a little interim treatment. So here we go.
Thank you. I hope it's an introduction, very oriented. But what happened to the idea of signal anxiety?
So the question is about signal anxiety. I think it's very much alive and kicking. I think that the idea that a strong part of our motivations is things to do to avoid the elicitation of anxiety, I think is very much there. I think that people, if you look at separation distress, you can certainly interpret, you can look at it as signal anxiety. When it comes on, it signifies oftentimes conflictual feelings about the object of love. We try to suppress it, we sometimes try to repress it, we go to many lengths in order to not let it flourish. And when it exceeds a certain threshold, we break down. We can no longer function appropriately. So the idea of signal anxiety as signifying an unconscious conflict, I think is still there. Do we have a complete neurobiology of that at this point? I don't think so. Jaap talked about the anterior cingulate and its role in conflict resolution, but the kinds of paradigms that we build in order to study in the laboratory are different than the kinds of things that we do as psychoanalysts. But if you ask me, does it exist or does it have value? I think it does.
So the next question was going to be Henry Nunberg. It was exactly the same question, and I see he's going to ask it. May I just say one thing about signal anxiety, because I've talked a little bit about that. These basic emotion command systems that Jaap describes, you must remember they're ancient systems, which in lower mammals, if I take all the lower, and that's the other humans, they're overwhelming and automatic, compulsive. They dictate how the animal is going to behave. In us humans, we have prefrontal lobes.
Primary process. People don't understand that. The confusion here is levels of control. The brain is an evolved organ. It's the only organ in the body where the evolutionary progressions can be seen. You can't see it in any other organ of the body. Everything that came later depends on what occurred earlier. The only thing affective neuroscience aspired to do was to give a realistic scientific image of the primary process, and that's it. And, sufficiently conservative that I will not be scalped by my colleagues, and that has not happened in, my career anyway, because they know I've protected myself. I'm data limited. In animals, you can study primary process very directly, variety techniques. You cannot study primary process in humans. You simply can't. You can assume it. You can also study secondary process in animals and humans. That is learning, basic learning, Pavlovian conditioning, Skinnerian conditioning, wonderful techniques. Try to remember that the great fear conditioners from Pavlov onward, Joe Ledoux, Mike Davis, Mike Fanslow, Steve Marin, University of Michigan, wonderful work. All they have focused on is secondary process. They have not yet assimilated primary process into their thinking. Tragedy. They're making mistakes because of that. They're not allowing translations that could be made. They're very powerful, and therefore, things don't happen. We humans live in tertiary process. We live in the lands of thoughts and neocortex and symbols and all the kind of Freudian psychoanalytic complexities. Only studies of human beings can answer those questions. If those questions are anchored in primary and secondary process understanding, we have a coherent understanding. But if tertiary process is allowed to float free, and to some extent Freud had no option but to allow that to float free. And I think signal anxiety is a tertiary process concept ultimately. Okay? It's not a primary process concept. And therefore, if you confuse levels of analysis, you'll have all kinds of paradox. Anyway, that's an opinion.
So for the psychoanalysts in the audience, I must just explain that the artist's classification of primary, secondary, and tertiary process is not quite the same as the Freudian meaning of those terms. I think what you call secondary and tertiary processes for us are both secondary processes. But just to finish the point in which Jacques has in a way already said what I wanted to say, which is that the secondary, in our nomenclature, signal anxiety is a secondary process. It's due to the inhibition of those primary instinctual emotion systems, which we are uniquely capable of, and we're not the only ones, but we're uniquely powerfully capable of inhibiting those systems to not compulsively act on them. And that makes thought possible. Inhibition of the instinct allows for the thinking. Thinking is guided by signal affects. And so it's like, if I could do this, or this, or this, or this, I'm not compelled to do any of them. They're all guided by the instinctual compulsion, but inhibited. So you can think through the options based on experience, based on all sorts of complexities that evolution couldn't predetermine. That's the advantage of it. It's so flexible. But the outcomes, in the virtual reality of our minds, of our thinking, the outcomes are determined by signal affects. If I did this, feels like that, shit, won't do that. Let's rather do this. So it's really a cognitive elaboration of these systems that Jacques and Yoram are talking about. Do you still want to make a point about signal anxiety? So then the third comment, I got to there, but the third comment was Jacques. Oh, he does?
No, just
conflict.
Just two things. One about the signal anxiety. The one thing I wonder about it is that what we're talking about, when we talk about anxiety, is a particular affect. That is, it's a particular way of feeling, what Jacques was talking about, and that seems to have some kind of a final common pathway, so to speak, that comes from both these systems, yeah? So that I just wonder whether you have any thoughts about that, about what that final common pathway is. That's one question. The other thing is sort of related, and that is, this brings up a lot about psychosomatic states and about the connection between pain and depression. I recently had an example of this with, I heard about it from a son of a patient who has bipolar 2 kind of disease and is depressed. He became ill. He had his back went out, and he became severely depressed at the same time. So, just as an example.
Okay, I think that there are very strong ties between pain and depression, and I think once you understand the neurobiology of the systems, then it makes perfect sense. If you just think about our language, when we talk about heartache, when we talk about a broken heart, we express our sadness, and specifically our sadness about the loss of an object, in somatic terms, and I think that that's no accident. I think that there are many studies that show that the link between depression and pain, and we know that in some cultures, one of the reasons why, for example, the DSM is not applicable worldwide is because there's some cultures, for example, the Chinese culture, where people manifest their depression somatically, where if you ask the questions, the screening questions about depressed mood, you might miss what would otherwise be a complete depressive syndrome, because it can be manifest physically. And so I very much agree with you. There's definitely that connection. Absolutely.
The next question's over here.
Hi, I'd like to go back to the different types of attachment that you talked about early in your talk. And I have a few questions with regard to that. One, in keeping with Dr. Katzkeep and what you said about primary process. You had talked about in the natural population, there about 50% have the secure attachment and the 50% have insecure, and then we break down the insecure in several ways. Has this been documented also, for example, in primates? And has the study been tried, you can't duplicate it exactly in a primate, but you could take the mother away at a certain age and see, and is there the same variability? To try to distinguish how much of it is primary versus is there already somewhat of a secondary process going on with the baby, with the infant? That's one question. And also, do we have a theory then based on the two different types of anxiety symptoms about the two different types of insecure attachment versus is there more of an issue with, is the anterior cingulate more active versus the amygdala? One of the babies is inconsolable and seems to have rage at the mother, whereas the other one sort of ignores the mother and shuts down completely.
It's a different kind of rage.
Right. So, do we have a hypothesis about what's going on in those two infants? Are we thinking of should there things that should be done proactively with infants in the future? And are we imaging infants?
I think these are excellent questions, and the common denominator to all three of them is that I don't know the answer. I'll tell you what I do know about the questions that you asked. You asked about paradigms of attachment in animals. Now, Bowlby did not know Paxson, but Bowlby knew very well the work of Harry Harlow, and actually they collaborated, Harlow and Bowlby. And some of those heartbreaking experiments that Harlow did in monkeypox have to do with what happens under extreme forms of separation. And I think that our understanding, it's ironic because I think that no institutional review board would ever allow Harlow today to do the kinds of experiments that he did, and I personally think that that's good. To do these things to monkeys is really heartbreaking. But had he not done them, we would not have known many things that we affirmatively do know now about early childhood and the dangers of early separation and the dangers of early neglect that have changed the way that we treat, or at least that we attempt to treat, children in our society.
Failure to thrive, etc.
But you asked about the less extreme, so you asked about individual variations in laboratory animals.
Yes.
I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a great question. Maybe there are a few animal experimenters here. And I can tell you that now in animal research, there's a whole new focus put on individual differences. That is, if in the past we wanted to limit things down to a single paradigm with a single dependent variable, whenever we studied something in an animal system, now we understand that just like in humans, if we want to understand what's going on, we have to look at multiple levels of analysis and in multiple outcome variables. So looking into individual differences is now something we see more and more in animals. Had such work been done with other animals, I don't know. If someone does, I'd be happy to hear about it, but I myself don't know. Yes, sir.
Very clearly, you're going to have animal models before you dissect what the heck is happening in the brain at these various levels. But Steve Sweeney, who presented here several times, his research program has been based largely after Harlow, not on the severe Harlow manipulations, but peer rearing and mother rearing. And mother rearing tends to, in general, produce secure attachments, and peer rearing produces insecure attachments. So we do have an animal model, at least for the two major types. How we're ever going to work out what the neuroscientific differences are, Steve Sumi appropriately does no neuroscience manipulations on his animals. Now that he considers himself a neuroscientist, he would love to have them, and he's found ways around his ethical dilemmas, but I won't go into that. But we do not have a small animal model of true social bonding between mother and infant. And we have worried about this. When we got into social mechanisms of the brain, we chose the dog as our subject because we thought it was better than primates. We thought that we could now be part of the social network. And that's why we did the original separation to stress in dogs. They had a real system. And, that research program had to fold because it was too early in our intellectual history for anyone to buy into it. But, the real neuroscience has to be done in a small rat-like animal. And I keep harping on the fact that our two most convenient species, which are rats and mice, and they're domesticated animals, there is no indication that there's a mother-infant bond. Now, it doesn't mean that the mother isn't important. Of course it is, as Hoffer has shown. The infant rat and the infant mouse are so totally immature, they wouldn't survive without maternal care. So there's great maternal care that the infant needs, but the infant has no need to bond to the mother because the care is so powerfully built in, and the little infant is so immature that they cannot get lost. They're preemies. They're total preemies. A preemie cannot get lost. They're captive audience of the mother. And there's no indication there's mother-infant bonding. And to study bonding, you gotta have a bond. It's like madness. My colleagues don't get it. My colleagues on depression task forces don't get it. No one seems to get it. I think, given time and listening, of course it's a no-brainer. The little sound that infant rats make is not a separation call because the animal cannot get lost. And when the animal can get lost, it no longer has a call. What's going on, So there's a lot of misinterpretation of especially Hoffer's data. You've got to study the infant sound, but it is not a separation call. It's an indication to the mother, you just dragged me out of the nest. I was latched to your teats. You went foraging, and I was still latched, and I got dragged out of the nest, and now I'm getting cold. And when you come back, please put me back in the nest call. So we need a small animal model. And when I decided after my third retirement that, and went to Washington State University, that finally I would devote some effort to trying to get a species with a mother-infant bond. So you have to look around the world and say, where can I find such an animal? And many of you might be familiar with Tom Insull's work and all that great Sue Carter work on voles. But I didn't go to the voles because the vole infant is also born like a rat. It's immature. I need an animal that is like a herbivore, a lamb and the mother, where the infant is born on the hoof and develops the bond very rapidly. But it's small enough to hold in your hand and do neuroscience work on it. So I looked around, and finally I decided on the octagon day grid. And since I was going to a veterinary school, You know, I said, oh, wouldn't it be neat if I bring them a species that no one is working on? And of course, you know, they were delighted. But we were confronted now with spending several years of research just studying the social ecology of the animal to see if there is a mother-infant bond. You know, is there real separation? Can we use this as a model? So we're just getting now a sense of confidence that we made an adequate choice. I don't know whether we made the best choice, but we made an adequate choice. This creature actually shows mother-infant bonding. We can now begin to ask, is there a secure attachment under certain conditions? Is there insecure attachment? And we already have some data on that. You know, how do we produce an insecure attachment? We separate some animals, and then we reunite them, and it's full reunion, and that's secure attachment. We take others, and we have isolated reunion, so now they can just look at mom through the window, so to speak, a screen thing, and that seems to produce an insecure type of attachment. So the models can be generated, and it takes years to develop these models, and you got to do it on your own dime, okay? Because no one understands what you're doing. Maybe psychoanalysts do, but believe me, neuroscientists don't know the value of having a really good model. The mother-infant bond has not yet been studied in great detail in animals because of the lack of a model.
So, one more taking of chair, whatever I am, chairperson's prerogative. Your question brought another anecdote to my mind. Because I'm among friends, I've got anecdotes pouring into my mind. But this Stephen Swomey, the primatologist that Jaak refers to, your question about, you know, are there primate models of the strange situation? He showed us a slide of the macaque monkey, which I think is a very apt to your question. He showed us. He said that at a certain point, after the little monkey is born, you know, the mum sticks with the baby for a while, and then it starts to sort of re-enter the wider world. And he says, and it starts to enter the sexual world too, and starts to, you know, have a sexual life again. And then he showed us this picture to illustrate it. I don't know if any of you were here when he showed it. It was the most poignant image of there was the little baby macaque monkey sitting in a tree, and down below was his mum bonking another man. And you thought separation, distress, and sadness and pain.
But
it was perfectly
it's primal scene. Primal scene trauma.
I've never forgotten that.
I'll be that story. Very good. Thank you very much. I have two comments. One, actually, the benzos are not antidepressants, nor are the opiates. It's the illogic of post-opropropyl. They certainly feel better, not because it's an antidepressant. This was shown Xanax first came out. Oh, man, it's a terrific antidepressant. It's not. Xanax is alcohol poison antidepressant. And what it does, it doesn't make you feel less bad. It makes you feel good, and that trumps the depression. And so you don't, it really is not an antidepressant, even though the person feels better for a while and completely depressed. And that's really important because we do that all the time in psychiatry and trying to relate the psychology of psychiatry to the physiology of psychiatry, and we go to these paradigms and they're really more difficult. And the second comment, and echoing what Dr. Frank said, about relationship between the site and the brain that lights up on an MRI or spectrum and what is happening there. And we all remember the great story of Mazio about what's his name, the guy who had the log go through his brain. Yeah. And that didn't destroy his capacity to relate. It wasn't a site that it destroyed, it interrupted his circuit. And his whole idea that the problem is the circuitry, not the site. We don't know what really is going on between those two ideas. it's very important to find out.
So, two things. One thing, I totally agree with you that benzodiazepines are not good antidepressants. And once you know that the systems, as I described it, you can realize why. Because they have an influence on the fear system, and they don't really inhibit the panic systems. But I have to take issue with you about the narcotics. And I think you're right about alcohol as well, by the way. Alcohol is not a good antidepressant for the same reason. It can tone down the fear system, by working in GABA and other things, but it's not a good antidepressant. And I have to take issue about the narcotics. Narcotics are wonderful antidepressants. They're real antidepressants. I can give you the reference for that Botkin study from 1995. But the truth is that if you look into the first half of the 20th century, people like Kreplin were using, before we had the tricyclics in the world, people like Kreplin were using narcotics as antidepressants. And antidepressants, like SSRIs, albeit in a different mechanism, do shut down the panic system. Jack can tell you about the experiments that he did in dogs, where he could suppress separation distress cries in puppies, dog puppies, by very small doses of narcotics. And we know that these clinically. I'll tell you where you see it clinically, okay? And how I came about the idea of the buprenorphine study, the idea to use that synthetic analog that Jack suggested, buprenorphine, to treat depression and specifically separation anxiety. And I used to have a borderline patient here in New York who, whenever her boyfriend dumped her, and she was an antidepressant already, she was an SSRI, and she was doing pretty much okay as long as she was with her boyfriend. Whenever he dumped her, she went to get her teeth fixed. Because after you get your teeth fixed, you get from the dentist, you get Percocet or Vicodin or things that have narcotics with them. And she told me that's the only thing that calmed down the terrible pain and sadness that she had. So I think we don't use narcotics as regular antidepressants, and there are very good reasons for that. I'm not advocating that we begin to use morphine again to treat depression, but they are powerful antidepressants, and it has to do with that link between depression and pain that's manifested in the panic system. So that's a very important thing. And I have a second point that I don't remember.
The next question is over here.
Thank you for a very thought-provoking discussion. My question is about the post-traumatic numbing or avoidance and its possible relationship with the cingallotomy or hyperfunctioning of the interior cingulate cortex. Could that be our own internal way, psychologically, to kind of numb ourselves, to numb the pain, or and I don't know whether enough research has been done in neuroscience about the trauma and the interior cingulate.
I think it's a very good question, and I can tell you that I personally agree with you. I think that is the case, that in PTSD, one of the reasons for those pervasive negative symptoms where the patients sort of pull themselves away from any human connection has to do with not wanting to trigger that fear. I'm not aware of straight data that we have to support it, but we do know that the treatments that we use so successfully in other anxiety disorders, like phobias, to desensitize, to treat fears when we know that we're only treating the fear system, don't work as well in PTSD. PTSD is much harder to treat than a specific phobia. It's much more pervasive, it's much harder to treat, it wreaks more havoc in a person's life, in that it impairs relations. So I suspect that it does very much involve the panic system. I'm not aware that we have the data. But now I remember the second thing that I wanted to say, and it actually had to do with the question that I was asking before, and that is about the correlates, the neurobiological and psychological correlates of insecure attachments. So I'm going to say something else that's speculative, but that's what I think, so I'll just use the podium and share it with you. I think that when we describe in psychoanalytic literature, and think about David Shapiro's book, Neurotic Styles, when we describe the histrionic style and the obsessive style as normal human ways of relating to the self, to relationships, and to life in general, I think that to a great extent overlaps the two insecure attachments. What I mean is that the insecure activating, the insecure resistant attachment, people who are very emotional, who tend to respond to separation with a lot of distress and a lot of clinging, and have very rich, lived emotional lives and emotional displays, I think that syncs very well with the histrionic personality style. Whereas the people who tend to dampen down their emotions, who are not, it's not that they're not anxious and not that they're not aggressive, they just express it differently, right? They shut down, they intellectualize, they distance themselves, they're very cautious about getting into deep relationships, and they intellectualize as a way of dealing with their emotions. I think that works very well with the insecure avoidant type. You know, there's those who deactivate, sort of shy away. What about the neurobiology of this? I don't know.
Okay. Looks like we're done. Can we go on and go?
Just to remind you, that this is our last meeting of the academic year. Our next meeting is the 2nd of October. The speaker is Vittorio Gillespie. I think it's Vittorio Gillespie. It's the Arnold Pepper Lecture, prize-winning lecture of the year, Mr. Mirror Neurons. And the Seattle Congress is when? July 23rd to 25th in Seattle is the Neuropsychoanalysis Congress. This year the topic is play. And let's thank again Professor Yoram Yovell.